Daniel Gray, he'll speak about his book Stramash. Daniel's written several books, including the acclaimed Homage to Caledonia, which was about 500 Scottish volunteers and the International Brigade who fought against Franco in the Spanish Civil War. So certainly a wee bit spice to the discussion tonight, the speaker tonight. So I'll invite Daniel to say a few words now, and we'll give him as much attention as we possibly can, and maybe we'll have a wee bit time for a few questions later.
Cheers! The dreaded item 10 is on. No resolutions though, except I've got some books to sell. The first book I wrote was a book about Scotland's role in the Spanish Civil War, and one thing that came to me tonight on the way here was I remember going through the lists of the many Scots that volunteered and seeing that one of them had put his address down as Hibs Supporters Club Sunnyside back in 1937, which I thought was superb. Either he used to sleep behind the bar or he was just often here. After that, as you said, I wrote Stramash, which I'll talk about now, a tour of the Scottish Football League club. So I didn't go to Hibs, even though I just live in the colonies on Lough End Road. I've been to Hibs plenty of time, and I have the man Tony Mowbray in common with you as a Middlesbrough fan myself. I used to stand on the Holgate end here, same place as Mogger, and Borough's not been the same since we unjustly sacked him earlier this year. And then last year I had a book out on English football in England, a travel book as well, about low division stuff with Bloomsbury, and that's gone well too. I've got 32 to shift in the spare room at the moment, so a few copies of that as well. They're all the 10, a £4 discount that one. That's my sales pitch over. I didn't know if you were in that. But back to Stramash time, which is about 3 or 4 seasons ago now. There is some Hibs in it as well, but not perhaps for tonight. Not least the great Alloa Cup quarter-final in the 1920s, the Gubby final. Begin with the very beginning of the book, appropriately of course, which is a quote from a wee rule book I found in the National Library of Scotland from the Alloa Football Club, 1947-48, which someone mentioned 1948 earlier, which I like. What would Saturday be without the match? It is a glorious opportunity to blow off steam that has been gathering for a week. Out you dirty, put him half, dig a hole ref, and all the other choice expressions heard where the big ball is being banged. Then a new world the next week. The man you dubbed a pudding is now the cat's whiskers. His antics tickle you no end. Give him the works. That's the stuff. Shoot, go, hard lines on the bar. What an atmosphere. Every move charged with electricity. Some of the players charged with dynamite. At least that's what it seems like to the poor fellow who gathers himself up from a sea of mud and politely asks the referee, "Is this Socky Hall Street or Tuesday?" But it's all in the game. The blokes in the work talk about it for weeks to come. You haven't the slightest idea. I know a couple of the lads in one of the Clyde shipyards who got into an argument one day. They were so engrossed and at times so heated that it was only when the watchman tapped them on the shoulders and asked them why they weren't away for the fair holidays like everybody else that they discovered they were at it for the whole weekend. Yes, that's football. Stramash then came about for a number of reasons. Picture the scene. 1991. A traffic jam in post-industrial Middlesbrough. From behind steamy windows with footballers' names rubbed into the condensation, James Alexander Gordon whispers the scores. East Stirlingshire 0, Cowdenbeath 0. Queen of the South 0, Montrose 3. To ears in Scotland, familiar names and familiar nils. To my young English ears by the car radio, exotic, faraway teams and lands. Where exactly is St Mirren, Dad? These were sounds of comfort and wonder, the shipping forecast for a young football obsessive. Approaching 30, that boy remained fascinated and clueless about Scotland's nether regions, those places that Jonathan Meades described as Pools coupon towns. Tired of travelling from Edinburgh to watch Middlesbrough millionaires go through the motions, and irked by the chain store-like dominance here of the old firm, it was in these places that I tried to recapture my love of football. this would not be about the unbeautiful game alone. While researching my first book, Homage to Caledonia, I briefly visited a number of small towns across Scotland, each of which had intrigued me. These have been places of character, substance, and wimpy restaurants. Now I wanted to see more of them, past and present. If these towns had been alert enough to send their sons and daughters to fight in Spain, then surely further events of a world scale lay beneath. What had been their roles? What part had they played in the making of Scotland and the world? And what did they do now? Football fixtures would provide an excuse for a season of Scotland that began in Ayr and ended in Elgin. 12 matches and an extensive knowledge of the ScotRail network later. Travelling around, I saw things of beauty and Cumbernauld. I found a gripping country, neglected Caledonia, places that changed history, places proudly defying economics and ridicule to carry on, places to laugh with. Just as football here always seemed to be about the old firm, history appeared to be forever linked to Edinburgh or Glasgow and kings or castles. Stramash is an attempt to pluck the likes of Cowdenbeath and Coke Bridge from the footnotes and place them in the main text, as well as recalling things like Elgin City's link to Lenin. The football and town elements are by no means disconnected. The clubs were release valves for oppressed miners, Cowdenbeath. They were the result of philanthropic acts by Victorians in posh hats, Morton, and they were glamorously, critically affected by the whims of the 1945 New Towns Committee report, Clyde. All were impacted upon by the world wars. There are modern trends which confirm the persistence of society's influence on the game. As small town populations fall, so do small town team attendances. And as people shun the diverse high street in pursuit of homogeneous out-of-town shopping malls, so too do they ignore their local teams and follow the giants of the globalised world, whether Rangers and Celtic or Man United and Barcelona. I wanted to see how all of this had made the towns and teams of modern Scotland look, and see how exactly they had managed to survive in a world where big had generally defeated small. And I wanted an excuse to drink in some different pubs. Stramash is by no means a comprehensive history of any of those towns and clubs. Dumfries features without mention of Burn, and Ali MacLeod makes only a brief appearance in the Ayr United chapter. My choices of town and team were often governed by ScotRail routes, fixture postponements, and whether or not I could convince my wife that I really should miss another of her friends' weddings to visit Cumbernauld. The answer was no, I shouldn't, hence the midweek visit to Clyde. In a cynical world choked with sneering attitudes to admittedly imperfect places and players, Stramash is unashamedly positive about its subject and a wordy love letter to local Scotland. The first reading from Stramash I'll do. I came across Stramash is about third history, football history and social history, and I came across these sepia heroes, footballers you don't hear about at all, and the first of those was a guy called Hyam Dimmer, brilliant name, who played for Ayr United. These people sort of became heroes to me, really. I sat in a lot of libraries researching and suddenly going, yes, as he got a hat-trick, to the consternation of many a librarian. Hyam Dimmer. Often the tallest man on the pitch. From 1935, inside forward Hyam Dimmer used his wiry frame to Ayr's advantage. He was renowned for gyroscopic contortions, a human magic box of tricks, flicks and pirouettes who revelled in creating laughter on the terraces and bemusement among opponents. An Encyclopedic Club historian Duncan Carmichael told me, the odd thing about Hyam Dimmer was his complexity of motion. He was more interested in entertaining the crowd and making goals for others than in scoring himself. There was a home match coinciding with Students' Day. Students were dressed up, running about with their collection tins. Dimmer was trying to match them. He had a sense of devilment like that. Not only did he have the temperament to humiliate opposing players, he had the ability to do it. Dimmer was an enigmatic maestro, as quietly approachable off the field as he was devastatingly extravagant on it. His unusual handle added to the mystique as Duncan continued. Hyam is something I don't understand. The name Hyam is synonymous with showmanship. He was brought up in Scotstoun, which was a rough shipbuilding area, and he's got a name like Hyam. You can only think that his life must have been a misery at school with a name like that. It was his name. It wasn't an adopted name. It wasn't a nickname. Such a flamboyant name for such a flamboyant style of play. Contemporary match reports from the Air Advertiser and Ayrshire Post detail that flamboyance. In a September 1936 thrashing of Forfar, though keeping a solemn poker face, he had the crowd in a good humour with his football wizardry and cheeky capers. 3 months later, on Boxing Day, Dimmer confirmed himself as football's #1 entertainer in an 8-1 mauling of Montrose. That season, he scored 25 and conjured up many more for others as Ayr took the title. From the team's opening, a 6-2 victory over Queen's Park, Dimmer proved his majesty at a higher level. That day, he had the defence running in circles and the crowd laughing. Predictably, his devilish artistry invited robust treatment from defenders. Against St Mirren, Dimmer tried some of his surrealist stuff on an opposition which did not appreciate art. His style could also arouse frustration among teammates and even supporters, goading bad report cards in the local press. Hyam started off not too well and created a bad impression by dilly-dallying in a way which aroused the alternate delight and ire of the spectators. Dimmer is a born footballer, but he has a habit of using his feet more than his head, which on occasion has made him more annoying than useful. At the outbreak of World War II, Dimmer remained aged just 22, far from footballing maturity. Military service robbed him of his prime. The SFA's announcement on the 4th of September 1939 that, in view of the government order closing all places of entertainment and outdoor sport, football players' contracts are automatically cancelled, ended Dimmer's top-flight career with Ayr. Though his time passed too quickly, this gangly magician had charmed football, his on-field excesses tolerated and even celebrated as a mesmeric trapping of genius. The second sepia hero is Wee Willie Crilly from Alloa. Wee Willie Crilly was born in Cookadens, Mr. Willie, 1903. Standing just over 5 feet tall, he matched deft footwork with prolific goal scoring, the minute master with a clinical eye. Crilly lived to play football, turning out on Sundays for a Glasgow meat market side named Pale Ale. Alloa folklore holds that Wee Willie once ran after the ball through the legs of an opponent's centre half, took it around the keeper, and then asked the supporters into which part of the net they wished to see him go. In his second season, after signing from Cambuslang, Crilly's exploits saw one journalist proclaim him the wonder man of modern football. That season was 1921-22. Alloa was first in the new Division 2. From the off, Crilly sparkled, his virtuosity providing escape for the watching band of brewers, miners and millers. Against Kings Park, a Stirling side later bombed out of existence by the Luftwaffe, he scored 5 goals in an 8-1 victory. The Alloa Circular newspaper reported how Crilly appeared to be in his element and wriggled like an eel through the mire. He was as elusive as a scarlet pimpernel and popped up when least expected. Press accolades went beyond the local. The Glasgow Citizen enthused, much of the history that is being made in the second league these days must be written around the wonder goal-getting boy, Crilly, who has several times taken Alloa around the nasty corner. Already his name has travelled far beyond the Ochil Hills, and Alloa are contemplating handing out copies of the commandment which forbids coveting to all strangers who strike the town. And say modern journalism shit. Imagine how good that would be. You could write like that about Mixu Patalainen. He's a big lad now. Surprisingly, even rival town and team newspapers joined in. The Stirling Observer offered that Crilly is a wonderful player, not far removed from being the best centre in Scotland, and a sore Stirling Sentinel masking its praise behind an industrial jibe. Regarding Crilly, he is the idol of Alloa. I don't blame the bottle blowers. Wee Willie's haul at Kings Park upped his running total to 23 in 16 matches. By the season's end, he'd scored 49 league goals, inspiring Alloa to an emphatic title win. In the town, Crilly was hero worshipped, with songs ringing from terrace and barroom alone. Even the people of Alloa, though, recognised that Crilly was no longer their secret wee genius, and that his star was rising. An article in the National Sports magazine demonstrated this. Crilly is the wonder man of modern football, and the wonder does not lie in the fact he has scored over 50 League Cup goals, but that he should be such a successful centre-forward, although he stands only 5'2" in his socks. Following the final game of the term, Celtic signed Crilly for £800. After just 3 appearances at Parkhead, he returned to the recreation ground, the boy wonder coming home. Plagued by injury, Crilly only occasionally flashed brightly in a Wasps team easily relegated from Division 1, before leaving for a new life in the US in the summer of 1923. Wee Willie died in Brooklyn, aged 51, far away from the glass blowers whose Saturday afternoons he had illuminated. In the towns, I could see the context in which these clubs grew, and I also wanted to write about the nature of these towns and the social history, as I said, of these places. And one place that really struck me, a neglected place, was Cowdenbeath. The history of Cowdenbeath flabbergasted me. It was this incredibly radical town. And now, if you get the cook draw there, or you go for a day out there, the New Goth, nice book. You just see it as one of those sort of poorer Fife towns with one main street, but the history of it is something that rings true of Leith, actually, the radicalism of the dock workers. Cowdenbeath, of course, is a mining town. Miners lived primitively and pokily in hovels swiftly erected by pit owners beneath the shadow of the Bing, sharing in the constant threat of death and disaster. Yet their exploitation did not breed submission, but a sense of togetherness. The solidarity felt between miners and their families found voice in left-wing politics, a constant in the town's history. It was here in 1875 that one of Britain's largest cooperative societies was founded, and here a century later that William Sharp was elected as Britain's first ever communist provost, his beat including a street named Gagarin Way in tribute to the Soviet space era. In between, French activist Laurent Storian chose to launch a branch of the anarchist Communist League in Cowdenbeath, and Willie Gallagher, the first communist to reach the Commons, became the local MP. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, it was in Cowdenbeath that the British government at one time perceived the threat of Bolshevik revolution. In the spring of 1921, local miners were locked out of their pits after refusing a 25% wage cut. On 4th of April, they held a rally in the Empire Theatre and marched through town accompanied by the Beef Pipe Band. The marchers were astonished to see a chimney smoking in the Dalby's pit, given that among their number were those who fired its furnaces. As one, the crowd made for the mine's boiler room, where they found colliery officials working to keep machinery running. A number scampered, but one, William Spalding, was unable to elude the baying mob and found himself seized and carried away. After parading their human spoils through town, the miners settled on Union Street and, rejecting calls for more violent action, attempted to stage a meeting with Spalding. They were soon interrupted by a robust police charge. Batons of the law met with the miners' pebble missiles, and Spalding was bundled onto a tram away from the ruckus. With the area rapidly cleared, a temporary calm descended upon Cowdenbeath. The following morning, newspapers carried stories claiming that the miners were plotting revolution, with Cowdenbeath as its epicentre. This rumour-mongering was taken seriously enough for concerns to be raised at cabinet level that a Soviet-style uprising was in the offing, to foster a feeling that government authority would have to be reasserted. 9 days after the Battle of Union Street, a convoy of buses arrived in Cowdenbeath before sunrise. On board were a crew of soldiers and marines instructed to place the town under martial law. As the Dunfermline Press reported, ratepayers woke up to find that the borough had been converted into what was virtually an armed camp. Soldiers were instructed to guard pit heads and assist police in arresting alleged insurrectionists. 8 men were detained and transferred to Dunfermline, the strains of the red flag reverberating as they were thrown into cells. All were found guilty of various disturbances, with 3 imprisoned for a year. Though the mines slowly returned to action, Cowdenbeath's rebellious spirit could not be quashed. In 1926, upon hearing that striking miners were planning a raid on local armories, Communist Party leader Harry Pollock rushed north to persuade Fifers that the rest of Britain was not yet ready for revolution. The town called the Chicago of Fife was doing a good impression of St. Petersburg. That was your history lesson. You can go out and storm Easterwood now.
We've got a couple of members in Cowdenbeath, but all right.
Of course, the main thing about writing a travel book, apart from bringing to light that history for me, is getting pissed in random pubs. But other than that, that's the first main thing. The second main thing is going to these places and being able to write about them. I've been able to sit being the odd little Englishman in the corner with my notepad, writing down the things people say and stuff like that. And of course going to the match. So we'll carry on the Cowdenbeath team and talk about the match. Beside Central Park, 2 Peterhead fans perused the meal deal board on the maroon pebble-dash walls of the Shimla Palace Indian restaurant. The signs were packed with information, and the $7.95 executive lunch enticed this pair of northeastern yuppies in. With no $7.95 curious English visitor meal on offer, I went straight for the turnstile, located in an off-white and blue wall resembling an abandoned cottage, only more charming and with a sign prohibiting cans, bottles and cartons. Cartons! Those Ribena-hurling yobs must have been back. I asked the teenage girl behind the confession-like mesh if the supporters' bar was open. Far from knowing the answer, the perplexed girl didn't even appear aware she worked at a football ground, as if she'd been drugged and told this was the counter at Miss Selfridge. In the sizable space between the turnstile and the pitch, scattered vehicle parts suggested a cluttered farmyard rather than a football ground, and acted as a reminder that other tenants dwell here. Stock car racing has taken place at Central Park since the early 1990s, the pounds of petrol heads often swelling the football club's coffers for rare reasons other than malnutrition. Above the doors hang dual signs translating for each sport, but being an intrepid traveller, I battled on through the language barricades and found the bar. There, 15 of us peered through rectangular windows onto the pitch as the players warmed up in front. It made me realise for the first time, and I had often wondered, what it would be like to watch a match played inside a giant fish tank. In a congenial but suppressed atmosphere, similar to that of a wedding reception before anyone is drunk enough to dance, I sipped ale and read the fantastically detailed programme. After 15 years of Premiership match magazines, I was genuinely shocked to find within its pages articles worth reading. It contained a number of winning puns too, such as a breezy column entitled, "That's Fife." I was a little concerned that an advert for the National Strategy and Action Plan to Prevent Suicide might point to a less than entertaining playing style. Inside the Goldfish Bowl, I sat in the smaller of the 2 conjoined main stands in front of the Peterhead contingent, less a travelling army and more a gang of curry-sated middle-aged blokes. The gang's vitriolic harangue of Peterhead's players was incongruous, given their liltingly pleasant accents, like hearing your granny say Fanny. From the off, they had much to gently bemoan as Cowdenbeath, pursuing promotion to Division 1, eased to a 2-0 lead. For the away side, Bobby Mann continued to play the ball out of defence with aplomb, a waddling elder statesman with more bargain bucket banquets than ambassadorial receptions behind, or rather in front of him. With feet full of talent and a stomach full to bursting, the club captain's actions screamed the word cult hero. Responding to the scoreline, Peterhead threw on Scotland's most well-travelled player, a trialist. The gawky forward looked more likely to try out for a job as an IT help desk officer than a footballer, and didn't help his cause by later asking a prone injured teammate to switch himself off and on again. On the Cowdenbeath bench, manager Danny Lennon achieved the incredible feat of looking measured and authoritative while sat in front of 23 used tyres on a folding chair from Argos's 1987 office range. His team thrived, and in defence, athletic centre-back Joe Burr showed little interest in letting any opposition player touch the ball. The only block was provided by the referee, who appeared jealous of the attention lavished on the players and reminded all of his presence with a series of elongated toots on his whistle. At half-time, I hiked to the terracing on the opposite side of the ground and leaned on a bright blue crush bar. From there, the pitch was a fair distance away, undoubtedly a boon during lean times. Where Ayres Somerset Park was daintily authentic, these brutal and exiled slabs of concrete were industrial heritage, and for that, every bit as worth preserving as Ayres' home. At the pie hatch, a hungry teenage lad muttered to his friends about how long he'd been waiting for chips. From a side room, the woman serving them picked up his griping with sonar efficiency and invisibly barked, "I've only just put the bloody things on, son!" When the match recommenced, I was pleased to find the crowd on this side had an irrational hatred of the referee. Each abuser took his turn as if singing in a round, and on the odd occasion, 2 volleys of abuse collided. An awkward first date silence was palpable between them. It had the feeling of a polite medieval market square at Stocks time. Occasionally taking a break from their bile, the Cowdenbeath fans had much to cheer as their side fired in a further 3 goals, finishing 5-0 winners. As the game wound down, revving engines could be heard in the car park, and at the whistle's final protracted blow, stock cars rolled in and goal nets were removed with a number of footballers still to leave the pitch. The vehicle's rasping exhaust replaced the bellowing fans, and petrol's whiff overcame that of chip fat. Next is a non-footballing moment before the match in dear old Alloa, a place I was very fond of, as you can probably tell. On Alloa High Street, the corners are filled with the Sun Studio, a tanning salon rather than a page 3 photography centre, a semi-chem, the Treetops Bar, and first, an outlet for all your porcelain doll, AM, FM clock radio and bong needs. Suddenly, while eyeing up a particularly appealing fine china King of Pop mug, I found myself jumping onto the road to evade a speeding pensioner in an electric mobility scooter. As I looked at her, riding into the sunset, from beneath swirling dust I made out a registration plate marked Turbogram on the back of the vehicle. This was Alloa Does Wild West. If only I'd purchased the Air Sport gun, just $3.99 off first. In her reckless actions, Turbogram was playing homage. The incident took place on Mill Street, where Gutty Mackenzie used to perform his cycling tricks. Through the 1940s, Gutty, named after the type of shoe he wore, would weave closely in between crowds and queues on his bike, often using it as a monocycle or bucking bronco. Unfortunately, Gutty was rather a large chap, and after a number of collisions his act was banned by magistrates. My ruffled post-turbo grand state was not helped by a shop window advert which disturbingly read, "Beautiful boys and girls, courageous colours, £40, wormed and litter trained." At which point I realised the postcard above for Arlene Allison photographers had slipped and obscured the word kittens. In search of respite, I stumbled into the Thistle Bar and settled down with a pint of imported lager in tribute to Alloa's brewing heritage. In the Wee County News, Clackmannanshire listeners were advertising a meeting in which people could learn more about listening over a cuppa. This would be especially useful, I noted, as Stirling and Falkirk Ramblers were holding their AGM the following night. Unfortunately, my smug chuckle at spotting this revelation attracted attention and, coupled with newbie status, acted as a green light from this particular pub's resident accoster. The accoster wore a polo neck t-shirt tucked into chinos and a moustache that had seen better days. He opened our discussion with an observation dressed as a question. "Reading the paper then?" Resisting all obvious sarcasm, I replied along the lines of, "Yes." To an accoster in small-town Scotland, My accent was encouragement enough for a whole new line of questioning and a perch next to me. "Oh, you're English. Whereabouts are you from?" After a few more of these, and then a 15-minute Acosta soliloquy with some breathtaking changes of subject, my favourite was, "Yes, I've never been to Middlesbrough. I just bought one of those Audi 2 litres. I was finally asked what exactly I was doing in Alloway. "What are you going to watch them for?" "Rather you than me." "Who's going to read that shite anyway?" My heart suitably filled with pointlessness, I headed for the door while he was in the gents, possibly telling the condom machine about his static home in Dunbar. This next wee sketch is the great town of Arbroath. Visitors to Venice fall for the city on seeing the Bridge of Sighs. With Barcelona, it's often La Sagrada Familia. Similarly, when I saw De Vito's nightclub replete with Twins-era cartoon images of the fun-sized thespian, I knew Arbroath would do it for me. Passing 8 or 9 hairdressers in the space of a few hundred metres, I heard several Polish voices while winding my way to the high street, a pleasing reminder that even if indigenous young people were fleeing small towns, at least their places were being taken by a driven, rejuvenating bunch. On Marketplace, I paid 30p to enter the Superloo and was soon glad I bothered. These turned out to be the most decorated public toilets in the world, the Brazil of bogs. Across the walls were proudly framed certificates proclaiming awards ranging from Dyson Loo of the Year to British Toilet Association Attendant of the Year. In some, toilet staff were photographed receiving awards from luminaries of the urinal world. Naturally, I entered with excitement, but while things were sparkling clean and smelt neutral enough, it wasn't the life-changing experience I'd anticipated. As I washed my hands, the encounter went further downhill when a chap emerged from the cubicle, eyeballed me via the mirror and asked, "Well, at 30p, I wasn't just going to have a pee, was I?" If cathedrals and toilets can charge entrance fees, then Arbroath High Street should be allowed to. Much of it is staggeringly beautiful, a real surprise. Maroon oil lamps, boo maroon, etc., and showy lampposts have been left intact, and 3-storey townhouses are painted blue or red, cheering up the stone no end. There were shop names of endearing tradition, Goodfellow and Stephen, and low-level lewdness, Pert, though something about the dinner lady Christian name stopped me from wanting to view Irene's lingerie. I turned the opposite way and walked upwards towards the Abbey. On the way, I heard an old lady ask her 2 friends, "Are Arbroath at home today?" "Aye," one of them angrily replied. "You can tell because there's men about the 2. This was either an uncommon occurrence in downtown Arbroath, or a coded salute to the fact that it was International Women's Day. Feeling guilty about my gender, I walked on between yet more elegance and a wimpy. In the window of Thomas Brown and Sons pet shop, a shakily written notice said, "For sale, 3 World War I medals, all named the same soldier with plaque and relevant papers." It was a glum thought that these medals, fought and won in some horror show or other, were now being flogged in full view of empty hamster cages. And this is a short incident, a short reading of a half-time incident at Morton. I'm sure we've all had half-time incidents at Morton. At half-time, I queued for a pie in the large terrace stand alongside the pitch. In front of me, a buxom old lady resembling a retired games teacher jogged on the spot to keep warm. Pie in hand, I moved to the collapsible condiments table and reached for the plastic ketchup dispenser. As I turned it upside down and gave it a shoogle, the top flew off, and the wrath of a full bottle was unleashed on my jacket, hands, and, more alarmingly, the nose of a child next to me. He wiped away the sauce with nonchalance, as if that sort of thing happened to him all the time, while I sought a cloth from the lady who'd sold me the pie. Instead, she emerged with a further replacement pie, which was absolutely rubbish at soaking up ketchup from my coat and the boy's nose. Watching football on your own can be a lonely, mortifying process. more readings. The last is towards the end of my season, I was at Queen of the South and just absolutely loved that place, loved the ground, beautiful terrace. Under the smoky red bricks of the standard grandstand, home supporters relaxed in the glow of sunshine and having nothing left to play for. 8 months of promotion toil had come to nothing, and with the pressure lifted, the contentment of failure had begun. A boy heaved the turnstile, and his dad urged him to lie about his age to get in more cheaply. Inside the ground overflowed with authenticity, history, and winningly foul language. Palmerston should be nationalised and stamped with a preservation order. Fans tried to summon the will to make noise as their minds drifted to August and next season, for there is always next season. On a deep terrace I leaned back and breathed in the atmosphere and the smell of stale meat. The main stand looked every inch a Sabutio extra I'd never been allowed as a child. With grubby windows and standing room only at the front, it had a nostalgic, filmic appeal, a metaphor for my Saturdays in the Scottish League. Very soon, I'd have to decide whether to stay forever suspended in this world of grounds with character and towns with wimpies, or return to England and reality. Still, that was for August. Right now, I was gleefully watching Derek Holmes do his best impersonation of Basher Hooliston, a former Queen's grey. Framed by shoulders resembling cornflake boxes, his lumbering style disguised some crafty touches. I found Holmes heroically retro and rejoiced when, with half an hour gone, he scored by apparently frightening the ball into the net. Opponents Airdrie, clutching the relegation zone in a firm embrace, awoke and equalised soon afterwards. The announcer pressed his microphone into action in preparation for giving the scorer's name, but perhaps exasperated, merely breathed heavily a few times before giving up. The Airdrie rabble stirred, roaring every tackle and throw. Where there's belief, there's hope. What didn't help matters was Captain Paul Lovering's decision to remove his undershirt in the middle of play, getting his head stuck in doing so. Headless and blinded, Lovering continued to pursue Derek Holmes regardless, and could still be running through the streets of Dumfries today. During the break, I sat on the terrace and pretended to read the programme. An angry gambler tore his slip of paper into more pieces than I thought possible and ranted, "Another fucking season and no win on the 50-50 draw. 50-50 my arsehole." "Dinny worry, Rab," said his friend. "We'll get you a scratch card and a pint after." Which sounded good to me. All around, teenagers lurked as if idling outside a newsagent. And probably Palmerston was the place to be, giving me great hope that small team Scotland will not be breathing its last any time soon. Airdrie began the second half full of vigour and direction and were soon 2-1 ahead. Around me, old men yawned into their scarves and rolled their eyes knowingly as if comforted by their team's ineptitude. Holmes plunged down to earth, and on the other side of the hoarding, a child fell over from the aftershock. Meanwhile, I was doing my very best to avoid eye contact with Doogie the Doonhamer, a strange contraption of a mascot character who seemed to be following me as I wandered around the stand. It reminded me that only weeks earlier my dad had been eating alone in a hotel's chain bar when Brewster the bear had saluted him from across the room, which was one of the loneliest and funniest things I had ever heard. Eluding Doogie, I settled at the back of the terrace and felt immensely grateful that football sanctity still existed, and that for all the game infuriated me, nothing could ever be as enjoyable as hearing an old woman shout, "Oh, you bastard!" when the ball hit the bar. The towns I'd been to had changed immeasurably over time, their people, especially the ones attending football, less so, and that was pretty comforting. The very last bit is another quote from something written way back when, in 1889, that rings frighteningly true of most of us in this room, I imagine, if not all. It's taken from the Scottish Football Annual, 1889-90. It's not like anything Graham Spears might write today. Too many people were imprisoned in closes and one-roomed houses from the cradle to the grave. Had in the past no such thorough and genuine relief such as football gives. From the pressures of ennui, from the weary monotony of life, from the hopelessness of toil which made them mere machines, they were seldom, if ever, very far away from the clanking of their chain. They could not make the grand tour, or take a fortnight at the coast, or run away from Saturday to Monday like the gay and gallant city clerks. But now football had brought to them a happier life, and had breathed to them interest in and enthusiasm for something different from the common experiences of their existence. It has helped them to taste of the extreme pleasures of forgetting themselves and their hard lot, and their squalid surroundings, and their general discomfort and poverty. The public house is no longer their own drawing room, and the close mouth no longer their only recreation ground. And we feel that we are justified in thinking well of football because of such things. Thank you.
Daniel, absolutely fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Very pictorial scenes, I would say. Just before we finish, maybe one question for me. How long did it take you to write the book? How many?
A year, just over the season. I did the research as I went, kind of thing, so about a year.
Can I say thanks very much for reading the book. That obviously saves us buying it.
It's true. I haven't read from this book for 2 years as well, so there's a lot of stutters, a lot of vague memories.
Sam?
If you do a second book, will you visit Gorgie as a smaller team?
Couldn't possibly comment on anything being filmed.
Okay, Daniel, thanks very much for that. Much appreciated. As we've said, what we're trying to do is get speakers along at every meeting. I know, again, as I said at the very beginning, firstly, there's a couple of new members come in, so welcome to them. Welcome on any new members that have come along